Glad you're here for Unintended Consequences, episode 65. Every story we cover starts with someone who had a reasonable plan. In 2015, a woman in a London supermarket reached for a pack of small white bin liners that had not existed on the same shelf 2 years earlier. The shelf itself had changed because the thin polyethylene carrier she once carried home from the checkout was no longer free. Where the store had previously stocked only a narrow range of larger refuse sacks, it now carried an entire row of smaller, purpose-made kitchen liners in several sizes and pack counts. She was not reaching for something exotic. She was replacing the exact function the grocery bag had served when she lined her household bin with it after unpacking the shopping. The plastic carrier bag she once carried home and then used for kitchen waste now cost 5 pence at the till, so she bought dedicated liners instead. The 5 pence charge applied only at the point of sale for the single-use grocery bag. Nothing in the policy priced the new liners she placed in her trolley. Over the course of a month, those separate purchases added up to several additional bags that had not previously been manufactured or transported for her household. The policy that removed one thin bag from circulation had quietly added several new ones. The bans and fees that spread through the 2010s grew out of clear evidence that single-use polyethylene bags were a visible and persistent form of litter. Marine biologists had documented bags in the digestive tracts of seabirds and turtles, and the photographs of those findings circulated widely among policymakers. Municipal workers counted them among the most common items collected on beaches, often tangled with driftwood or half buried in sand, after only a few tides. Regulators in Ireland, the United Kingdom, California, and dozens of other jurisdictions therefore treated the bag as a low-cost target because it was both easy to identify and already familiar to the public as an everyday object. A small price signal or outright prohibition looked like a straightforward way to change behavior without banning plastic itself. At the time, most households already reused grocery bags as bin liners, so officials expected the main effect to be fewer bags entering the waste stream altogether. The arithmetic seemed simple. If a household stopped receiving 50 free bags a year and simply stopped using that many bags, total plastic would decline by the same amount. No one needed to model what would happen if the same household instead purchased an equivalent number of purpose-made liners, because the assumption was that reuse would continue and overall consumption would fall. Ireland introduced the first nationwide levy in 2002 at 15 cents per bag. Consumption fell roughly 90% within months, a drop large enough that the thin bags almost disappeared from visible litter counts. England followed with a 5 pence charge in 2015, later raised to 10 pence. California enacted a statewide ban on single-use bags in 2016 after earlier local rules. Early data showed sharp drops in bag litter along waterways and in municipal cleanups. Retailers reported handing out far fewer free bags, and environmental groups hailed the measures as quick wins. A few analysts noted that households might simply switch to other plastic products, but those cautions remained secondary to the visible reduction in discarded bags. Once the thin grocery bag disappeared, many households began purchasing purpose-made trash bin liners. In the United Kingdom, sales of small kitchen bin bags rose noticeably after 2015, offsetting a large share of the plastic that had been removed. The new liners were manufactured from similar polyethylene resin, shipped in their own corrugated boxes, and stocked on separate aisles, so the total tonnage of plastic moving through the supply chain did not shrink by the full amount the original bags had weighed. In places that permitted thicker bags for life, shoppers often treated the new bags as single-use items anyway. The heavier gauge simply meant more plastic per discarded bag because the material that replaced the original thin film was 2 or 3 times as thick and therefore carried more resin per unit even when used only once. Life cycle assessments, including a widely cited 2011 UK Environment Agency study, calculated that a cotton tote bag must be reused at least 131 times to produce lower environmental impacts than the single-use polyethylene bag it replaced. The 131 figure came from adding up the energy and water required to grow, dye, and weave the cotton, then dividing that total impact across the number of uses until it fell below the impact of one lightweight polyethylene bag. Most cotton totes were used far fewer times before being lost or discarded, so the arithmetic never reached the break-even point for the majority of households that bought them. Because the original policy focused on one product category, it did not track or price the substitutes that consumers actually chose. The result was a partial shift in plastic tonnage rather than a net reduction, plus an increase in the number of separate plastic items manufactured and transported. Some jurisdictions later adjusted their rules. England expanded its charge to all retailers and raised the fee. A handful of cities began requiring minimum recycled content or durability standards for reusable bags. Researchers published clearer guidance on reuse thresholds, and a few campaigns encouraged residents to keep and reuse the thicker bags they already owned. No large program has been fully reversed, yet the emphasis in newer policies has moved toward measuring total plastic mass and requiring retailers to report sales of alternative bags. The core design lesson that substitutes must be measured alongside the targeted item now appears in guidance from several national environment ministries. Any intervention that removes one behavior necessarily prices or permits its substitutes. So the relevant unit of analysis is the full set of options people will actually adopt. Simple product bans therefore require follow-up data on what replaces the banned item, even when early litter counts look encouraging. The same principle applies to fees, deposit schemes, and material restrictions today. Without tracking the second-order purchases, the policy can relocate rather than reduce the impact it set out to solve. When you see a new rule aimed at one everyday item, what other products do you expect households to reach for instead? And how will those choices be measured? That's unintended consequences for today. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend who'd appreciate the story. Subscribe wherever you listen, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network, links in the show notes. Quick tip from the network, try the Do Positive Pod next. Good news in science and tech, plus one concrete action you can take. Every NARA Network show is free at naranetwork.com. Want the written briefing with source links? Each show keeps a summaries page on naranetwork.com, scannable, dated, and free. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.